Okay, hello everyone. My name is Doug Sprouse. I am with the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division, and I'm here today to speak to you about the IRIS biometric. But before I begin telling you about the FBI's IRIS program, I first want to establish exactly which part of the eye we're talking about. So the iris is the colored part of the eye that surrounds the pupil, and it is unique to each and every one of us, and that is why it can be used as a biometric identification modality. I make this distinction because people often confuse the terms iris identification and retina scans. And the FBI is actually in the business of iris identification, and that involves taking a photographic image of the iris using infrared light technology. Whereas with a retina scan, and I really don't know anything about retina scans, but apparently it involves some sort of scanning of the retina, which is a nerve that sits in the back of the eye that communicates information to and from the brain. A fun fact about the iris is that it is a muscle that controls the amount of light that enters the eye that enables us to see. So in dimly lit areas, the iris actually dilates the pupil or enlarges it to allow additional light into the eye so that you can see in dark spaces. And then in bright area or environments, it constricts the pupil so that it restricts the amount of light entering the eye so that it's tolerable to see in those environments. And this becomes evident if you have ever gone to a matinee movie and you walk into the movie theater after being outside and you can't see anything or your hand in front of your face. And then after a few moments, your eyes start to adjust and then you can kind of start seeing your surroundings. Well, that is your iris at work dilating your pupil, letting more light into the eye so that you can see in that dark theater. And then when you go outside after the movie is over with your eyes dilated, your eyes are too sensitive for the sunlight. So you put your hand over your eyes to shield you from the sun until your eyes or your iris has a chance to constrict that pupil back down to restrict the amount of sunlight that is entering into your eye so that you can see in that environment. So now that we know a little bit about what the iris is, the next question I want to answer is, why did the FBI deploy an iris identification program in the first place? So back in the early 2000s, the FBI recognized a need to update its identification management system to make it bigger, better, faster, and more robust. And as part of this, the planning process for this project, the CJIS division canvassed its user community and asked them what they wanted to see in terms of capability for this new system. And one specific area of interest was the iris biometric. And that led to a successful 7-year iris pilot that was conducted by our division, the CJIS division, that began in the year 2013. So that kind of brings us up to where we are today, and the FBI's IRIS program is now called the Next Generation Identification IRIS Service. It was deployed in September of 2020, and it currently contains over 2 million sets of iris images that represent approximately 1.7 or 1.5 million unique identities. And what it actually is it's a national repository that is available to authorized law enforcement and criminal justice agencies for the enrollment and search of iris images using an automated algorithm. And the future goal or use case for this program is to be able to provide law enforcement with an additional tool that will improve officer safety during roadside stops. But it is not a viable solution for that use case as we speak because our database is simply too small to provide a reliable result. So that's why there are people like me speaking at events like this so that we can communicate this new FBI capability to our user community, and hopefully we can appeal to you to start collecting these iris images and submitting those to the FBI for enrollment. And then in situations where an agency doesn't have the funding at this time to implement the iris biometric, we ask that you at least consider earmarking some funding so that the next time you go to contract renegotiations with your service providers, you can enter the iris biometric into that discussion. So having said all that, today the iris biometric is being successfully used in the prison and jail systems for identification validation during the inmate transfer and or release processes. Now, we certainly understand that confirming the identity of an individual before they're released from custody is nothing new for law enforcement and criminal justice agencies. However, we do believe that by adding the iris biometric to the mix, it's going to improve the process. Here just recently, our team had the opportunity to visit a regional jail, and during that visit, the superintendent of the jail told us that we would be surprised on how many times in the past an incorrect inmate was released from custody, and that was due to their manual release processes and the fact that inmates are always trying to game the system. So the iris biometric is attractive in these environments, number one, because it's reliable, and number two, because being an automated process, it's going to remove a lot of the risk of human error from that process. In addition to that, the iris biometric is fast, it's accurate, and it's contactless. In terms of speed, the average iris capture and transaction response times are 2 seconds and 20 seconds respectively. In terms of accuracy, in studies conducted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the iris biometric demonstrated greater than a 99% accuracy rate. And that is comparable to what one would expect from the accuracy rate of a fingerprint identification search, and that's the gold standard when it comes to biometric identification. And then lastly, in terms of being a contactless biometric, so that means that there is no requirement to physically contact that person to collect their biometrics for identification purposes. You just instruct them to stand on the X, look into the camera, and snap the image. While we were visiting that regional jail, we had the opportunity to observe their intake booking process, which naturally includes collecting a fingerprint. And during that process, the officer was literally shoulder to shoulder with that new inmate, and he had both of his hands on the person's wrist, helping navigate through the live scan process. So in the social distancing world in which we now live, by adding the iris biometric to the process, it will add an additional layer of safety to both the inmate and the officer from this transfer and release process, especially in those situations where they're currently using the fingerprint to provide the identification. So we envision the iris biometric being collected during the normal booking process, and that will enable us to link it to the fingerprint record. Excuse me. And what that is going to do, it's going to strengthen the reliability of an already reliable biometric. So for example, a person enters the correctional facility and they go through the intake booking process. They get their fingerprints rolled, they get their mugshots taken. Now they will also get their irises captured. All of that information is gathered electronically at the same time and then seamlessly gets submitted up to the State Identification Bureau and then on over to the FBI for enrollment into our system. This does two things. First, it is building that national repository for that future law enforcement use case. And then second, it is creating a legacy image in our system for that individual. So when it comes time to transfer or release them, all the staff needs to do is merely collect an additional set of iris images and submit those for an identification search to the FBI. In situations where that iris search results in an identification, there is an automatic cross-reference of the NCIC wanted persons file, sex offender registry, and immigration violator file. And available information is submitted back to the contributor, where periodically it results in a change of custody as opposed to releasing that person back to the public. An example of this happened back in June of 2021, where there was an inmate that was scheduled to be released from prison. And prior to their release, their staff conducted an iris identification search at 9:28 a.m. against the FBI's iris service. At 9:29 a.m., the NGI system responded with an identification that included a wanted persons record for that individual. So a notification was sent to the wanting agency, a change of custody was made to the local sheriff's department where that person was rebooked at 2:14 that afternoon. That's pretty cool stuff. So similarly, in February of 2022, earlier this year, Same situation happened where there was an inmate being scheduled to be released. The staff conducted an iris search prior to, and this time it occurred at 9:27 and 31 seconds a.m. And then at 9:27 and 45 seconds a.m., which was 14 seconds later, the NGI responded with an identification, and this time it contained multiple wanted person records for this individual. So again, the notifications were sent, and this time the wanting agencies were out-of-state agencies. So that person was actually extradited back to the state of origin, so to speak, to one of those agencies where they were rebooked at 10:41 p.m. that same evening. So I provide these two examples just to illustrate the speed and the power of this biometric being used in this arena. So that pretty much answers the who, what, where, and when of the iris biometric being used by the FBI. And now I just want to take another quick moment to talk to you about the how. And there's three topics that I want to cover. The first, the three topics are enrollments, searches, and technical requirements. So in terms of enrollments, there are three different ways an agency can contribute their iris images to the FBI's system. And the most common way is during the normal criminal booking process via the car tote or the criminal answer required type of transaction. The second way is via a FIS tote or a biometric image submission, and this is used when there is an agency out there that has a database of iris images and they want to contribute and participate with the FBI's process or program, and they want to submit those all at one time. So this allows you to submit iris information to us in bulk. And then the last option is it's actually an offline bulk enrollment, and this is for those agencies that have that database that they want to contribute to the FBI, but they do not have the technical ability to send those electronically. So this involves coordination between the agency and the FBI, where the agency will extract their iris images to some sort of media and send that over to us, and then we will do the manual import on our side for those images. So from a search perspective, the system, obviously has a search capability as previously discussed in the presentation, but the results are provided without any human intervention needed. And these results respond with an ident, non-ident response that also contains a criminal history report. And then mugshots are also available upon request. And then the last thing I wanted to talk to you about were the technical requirements. And I want to ensure that you're working with your service providers to ensure that you have the iris types of transactions processed or programmed for use. But those agencies that are EBTS 11.0 compliant already have those types of transactions programmed in so that you can actually begin participating today. So that's pretty much all I have for you for this discussion. But if you want to see a demonstration of how the FBI is using the iris biometric, please stop by our booth at location row 13, booth number 42, and I would be happy to accommodate you. So at this time, I guess, I don't know if it's appropriate to do questions or whatever, but if you have any questions, I've got a few minutes probably to answer anything that you might have.
Any enrollment into CJIS of an iris needs a 10 print associated with it.
That is correct. Yes. Yes, and the question is do any, it's kind of a secondary biometric. It's not only the iris, but the face and everything else. Anything secondary to the fingerprint has to be linkable back to the fingerprint because that's what our identification management system is based on. Yes, sir.
If somebody has a fingerprint record in the system and they're identified with their fingerprint, can you subsequently add iris to that record, or is that not a process?
So, does anybody have an answer to that? Okay. Here, can you repeat that question? I've got some fingerprint knowledge.
So if I have, what do you call it, a TCN number that's associated with a fingerprint enrollment, if I identify someone with a fingerprint, can I subsequently add iris to that TCN, or I have to do another one? a brand new one, another fingerprint enrollment.
So, do you have the capability to link the iris biometric to that TCN beforehand? Yes. So, like, most times, or a lot of times, agencies, the way this works for a bulk enrollment is the agency already has a linkable link to the fingerprint and through the SID number, and they can match that UCN up with the iris and submit those, and then we will connect that on the FBI side.
The reason I ask is customers ask me that question.
Okay. Yeah, and feel free to have them send their questions our way too. We would enjoy talking to them as well. But thank you very much. Those are very good questions. Anybody else? All right, I appreciate it. You all enjoy your time.